Clint Eastwood once said, "What makes a good Western is just a good story." And look, he knows exactly what he's talking about. The guy starred in and directed some of the greatest Westerns ever made. Won a couple Oscars too. When Clint Eastwood says a Western is worth your time, it probably is. And when he says he hates it, well, he definitely isn't shy about it. Back when Eastwood was just starting out, long before Dirty Harry, before the Dollars trilogy, his #1 idol was James Cagney. Even above legends like Humphrey Bogart or Henry Fonda. Eastwood always thought it was kind of funny how much he loved Cagney, since they're so different on screen. In Run for Cover, Cagney was getting older, but he's still got it. He plays a guy who escapes from prison after being locked up for something he didn't do, ends up becoming sheriff of a little town, and even though it's an older Cagney, he's still got all that charm, all that swagger. Eastwood loves that about him, calls Cagney one of the gutsiest actors ever, someone who wasn't afraid to go against what everyone else expected. He said, Cagney could commit the worst horrors on screen. He seemed to be ready for anything and laughed at what the public thought. Years later, Eastwood actually snuck in a little homage to Cagney in Dirty Harry. You know that scene where he's in the shootout, just casually eating a hot dog? That's him straight up copying Cagney, who once blasted some guy while eating a chicken leg in white heat. This one is funny because it's a Clint Eastwood movie and he absolutely hates it. He hates it so much he almost quit acting after seeing it. Back in the late 50s, before he got big, Eastwood was mostly stuck in the low-budget junk, and Ambush at Cimarron Pass was exactly that. Basically, it's about a cavalry sergeant who teams up with 2 former Confederate soldiers to move a prisoner through dangerous Native American territory. Clint was hoping it'd finally be his big break. He plays one of the Confederate soldiers, but when he watched the finished movie, he said, "This is the worst thing ever." Eastwood saw it at a cheap theater and was so embarrassed, he sunk lower and lower into his seat. Told his wife, "That's it, I'm done. I gotta quit acting, I gotta go back to school, I gotta get a real job." But weirdly, right when he was ready to quit, he just happened to bump into someone at CBS who offered him a role in a show called Rawhide. That ended up saving his entire career. He calls it a lucky break, but Ambush at Cimarron Pass almost killed it all. So this next one, Eastwood named it one of his all-time favorite movies. John Huston's classic, The Treasure of Sierra Madre. The story is about these 2 broke Americans down in Mexico who team up with this old prospector to find gold, and it ends up becoming this classic story of greed and corruption, because once they find gold, they completely lose their minds. Eastwood said it's probably one of the best screenplays ever, and he's always loved Humphrey Bogart in this movie, playing the paranoid, crazy Fred Dobbs. Eastwood said about Bogart's character, "He wasn't a conventional protagonist or romantic hero you can take cover behind. There was nothing glamorous about him." And Eastwood knows a little something about characters like that, pretty much built a career playing those morally gray guys. Eastwood is also a huge fan of director John Huston, so much so he actually played Huston himself in White Hunter Blackheart, a movie about the making of the African Queen. He never met Huston personally, but said he tried hard to think like him, reconstruct his turns of thought and share his philosophy. One time someone asked Eastwood, if he could save only 2 movies from a fire at the National Film Archives, what would they be? Clint said he'd have to cheat and pick 3. The Oxbow Incident, The Grapes of Wrath, and of course, The Treasure of Sierra Madre. You can't talk Clint Eastwood without talking spaghetti westerns, and obviously Ennio Morricone. Everybody knows Morricone's music for Sergio Leone's trilogy, but he scored a bunch of other Italian westerns too, including this one by Sergio Corbucci. In the 60s, Eastwood felt American westerns were getting stale. John Ford and Anthony Mann weren't really making movies anymore. Then the Italians showed up and took over. Corbucci was basically second only to Sergio Leone as the spaghetti western guy. And The Great Silence was exactly the kind of movie you'd never see Hollywood try to make at the time. It's dark, violent, and super bleak. It's about a mute gunslinger hired by a woman to kill the bounty hunters who murdered her husband. Even Quentin Tarantino loves this movie. He said it's got one of the most nihilistic endings ever. Basically, everyone dies, the bad guys win, and that's it. Tarantino's The Hateful Eight took a ton of inspiration from it. Eastwood himself once thought about doing an American remake, but it ended up evolving into Joe Kidd with John Sturges, which isn't exactly the same, but definitely borrows from Corbucci thematically. Since we mentioned Joe Kidd, we have to talk about it, because Eastwood definitely wasn't a fan of this one either. Another Clint Eastwood movie he straight up hates. You've got Eastwood as Joe Kidd, a tough gunfighter who's hired by a corrupt landowner, played by Robert Duvall, to go after a Mexican rebel who's fighting to keep his land. It had an incredible team behind it, John Sturges directing, the guy who made The Magnificent Seven, a script by Elmore Leonard, music by Lalo Schifrin. All-star talent, basically. But the movie just doesn't work. Even Eastwood admits it. He said the whole thing felt flat, kind of lifeless. His character didn't really have any clear motivation. The story felt thin. On top of that, Sturges had a serious drinking problem during filming. He was drunk on set a lot. Sometimes the assistant director had to take over. Eastwood was really annoyed about that. It got to the point where both of them, Sturges and Eastwood, ended up frustrated with each other. Sturges even said later he wished he'd just quit halfway through. This ended up being the very last time Eastwood let someone else direct him in a Western. After Joe Kidd, he took control himself for the next 4 Westerns he starred in. It's not terrible, honestly. It looks great, there's a decent cast, and it has its moments. But compared to what Eastwood usually delivers, it just feels like a lazy effort. Red River is a different kind of Western. It's about generations clashing, the older, tougher generation versus the younger, more thoughtful one. You've got John Wayne playing an older cattle rancher, stubborn and closed-minded, clashing with his younger protege. Eastwood has huge respect for Howard Hawks, the director. He always admired how versatile Hawks was. He could direct something as gritty and serious as Red River, then turn around and make something completely different like His Girl Friday. Now obviously, John Wayne was the Western legend, and Eastwood and Wayne are 2 of the biggest names ever in the genre. But they didn't exactly see eye to eye. Both were conservative, but in very different ways. Wayne represented traditional values, usually played heroes who were straight-up good guys. Eastwood, especially in his spaghetti westerns, was darker, usually morally questionable. At one point, there was actually a chance to get them in the same movie, a Larry Cohen script called The Hostiles. Would have had Eastwood and Wayne go head-to-head on screen, but Wayne said no immediately. Basically, their philosophies about westerns were just too far apart to make it happen. This one's different again, because it's barely even a western, more like a courtroom drama. You've got this angry mob hunting down some guys they think robbed and killed a local rancher. No trial, no evidence, just mob justice. Eastwood loves this film, calls it one of his 3 favorites ever. He talked once about how the director, William Wellman, said the studio bosses hated this movie when they first saw it, thought it was just a cheap B-movie, didn't even give it a proper chance in theaters. But later, critics, especially French critics, saw its value. They realized it was saying something serious about mob violence, justice, revenge. Eventually, Americans saw its importance too, but by then the movie was already buried, forgotten. Eastwood mentioned it in an interview with the British Film Institute, said it's a perfect example of a movie everyone overlooked at first, but eventually recognized as great. He said, "I hope people see it again with a different eye, in the US as well as elsewhere." And finally, High Noon. Gary Cooper, as an old sheriff, literally minutes from retirement, when suddenly word hits town that this ruthless outlaw and his gang are on their way back looking for revenge. Basically turns into a thriller, all about the suspense of waiting for this showdown to happen. Eastwood always liked Gary Cooper, said he had this mysterious quality, like Henry Fonda. You never really knew exactly what he was thinking. Cooper's sheriff here is older, tired, reluctant, more human than your typical Western hero. Eastwood relates to that. He basically built the last decades of his career playing guys exactly like this, older, tough, but vulnerable. And Eastwood admits that his own High Plains drifter pretty much owes everything to High Noon. He said he wanted to take the same idea but push it further, saying he liked imagining what would happen if the sheriff was killed, but came back as some kind of ghost or demon for revenge. He left it intentionally vague, wanted people to come up with their own ideas about what it meant. but High Noon was basically his starting point, a huge inspiration.